You've been working on that design problem for months without a lot of progress. Maybe it's time to apply some Triz on it. Triz. Capital T, capital R, capital I, capital Z. Triz. Triz is an acronym, but it's a Russian acronym, and I'm going to do my best to pronounce it. It stands for Teoria Решения изобретательских задач, which, if you translate it into English, roughly means the theory of inventive problem solving. So in English, you might actually hear it as TIPS, T-I-P-S, for theory of inventive problem solving, but more often, even in English, amongst the engineering design world, you'll hear it as Triz. It is what it sounds like. It's a theory, it's a methodology, and it's a theory about how to invent new things and solve problems and make things better, design things better. It comes from this Russian inventor and engineer and writer, Heinrich Altschuler, and he was an inventor around the time of World War II up into the Soviet era. And I was introduced to Mr. Altschuler and his theory, his Triz theory, in mechanical engineering grad school, because the way my professor had put it, the American engineers in the World War II to Cold War era had their own ways of trying to solve design problems, and then the Soviets also had their own ways of trying to solve design problems, and they did not talk to each other, if you remember our history. So, yeah, we had brainstorming and maybe visual ideation methods coming out of the Western world, and in the Soviet or Eastern world, we had Triz, because that was very popular in the 70s in the Soviet Union. This theory came about when Mr. Altschuler reviewed tons and tons of patents or records of invention. And he saw, it was basically a giant pattern recognition problem. He saw different patterns in how people solved problems and created inventions through that time, especially for physical designs. And he ended up creating a bunch of different principles for summarizing these solutions. For example, he might have seen that there is this pattern of continuity of action or of useful action where, like, in the past, some invention could only be used if you use it in one direction, but you can make that invention better if you design it so that it can be used in both directions, like a knife or a saw. Like, you know how a saw might have a cutting edge where it only cuts if you pull it towards you? Well, you could change the design where you could pull it towards you and away from you, and the saw cuts in both directions. That's like one tiny example of what we mean. And he had 40 different principles of how to design things better based on the patents that he had seen. Now, these 40 principles are not the only part of the theory. He had a lot of other design tips that, pun intended, that he gave out to engineers and inventors for how to make things better. And ultimately, it became kind of an algorithmic recommendation, a method of identifying trade-offs or what he called contradictions in a design or design problem, and ways to resolve those trade-offs or resolve those contradictions without really sacrificing too much performance. And the way my mechanical engineering professor described it, Triz also was a good way to model the evolution of inventions or the evolution of technology. That things might start out mechanical and go into more electrical and then go into more information-based designs. If you do review Mr. Altschuler's Triz theory and all the people who advanced this theory, a lot of the principles for design solutions, they really are physical. They have to do with things you can touch and see. And I think it's interesting that now we're moving into this information age and we are going to this third level or this higher level of having information-based solutions to everything. And I'm not sure that Triz really touches on those inventions too much. So maybe Triz is still being advanced into the future. Also note that this Eastern way of getting solutions or this Soviet way of getting solutions is very descriptive. It took all the solutions of the past and is trying to find that pattern of what worked in the past and using those solutions for the future. Whereas things like brainstorming, it's very intuitive. You're looking towards the internal inspiration of the group. these other design methodologies are very different from Triz. Triz is very systematic. It looks towards existing solutions, and brainstorming might be very inspirational or aspirational and looks at the crazy, looks at the ridiculous, and tries to find solutions from there. Just two different approaches for coming up with design solutions. It's very interesting. So, Triz is our engineering word of the day, and I tried my best with the Russian. You can look up more for yourself. Hi, this is your host of Engineering Word of the Day, Pius. I also host the K-12 Engineering Education Podcast, which is longer and is all about getting engineering thinking and knowledge and enthusiasm to people of all ages, including kids. So if you're interested in that too, you should go on over to k12engineering.net, learn more about the podcast, and take a listen. Thanks.